This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chaim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast in Port St. Lucie. Okay.
And happy Seder to you. Coming
Well,
up.
Coming up. It's a week from Saturday. Hi. How did it get to be
Already?
this late already?
It's,
Yeah.
it's
Like you turn around. I swear it was Purim last week.
Wow.
But we're already well into Nissan, and
Did they buy commercial time? Oh, I'm sorry.
different Nissan.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. What can I say? So Passover, Pesach is coming, and it'll be here for its 7 or 8 days, depending. Americans celebrate either 7 or 8 days. It's 8 days theoretically outside of the land of Israel, and that has to do with the way that calendars were handled and calculated. It's called the Day of Diaspora, that is added on to holidays to make sure you cover the holiday if it took a while for the news of the holiday to get to you. Obviously,
That's interesting.
in today's world, not as critical. The calendar is pretty clear.
That's fascinating, though.
Well, because think about it.
Well, sure.
A few thousand years ago, they didn't have Instagram. They
No
didn't
Twitter?
have no Twitter, no Facebook, not even TV or telephone. So, they didn't even have those rotary phones. So, and it's interesting because one of the things that they used to do, it used to be that somebody would see the moon, and according to what time of the year it was, they would run to the Sanhedrin, to the court in Jerusalem, and witness the fact, or describe to the judges the new moon that they had seen, and the judges would query and say, where in the sky was it? What did it look like? To make sure that they really did see it. And if two separate independent witnesses both saw it, then they would declare the new moon, the new month. And and then word would go out from Jerusalem to all parts of the world. But it sometimes took a little bit of time to travel. Now, obviously, since you're looking at the moon and it's at night, you can, it's nighttime. And so one of the ways that they used to do that was they used to light bonfires. And the fires could be seen from hill to hill to hill across great distances, and it would travel pretty quickly in the course of the evening. Unfortunately, sometimes others would light extra bonfires just for fun, or not pass fires on, or whatever, as it went through different lands. And so the messages sometimes got messed up. And that was done out of mischief or whatever else, just to make sure the calendar got messed up for people.
Or set bonfires in the U.S. and just
whatever,
to be mischievous, mischievous, whatever.
Yeah, one of those things. And so the calendar was harder to send out. Right, messages were much harder.
And again, as you said, there was no written. We flip through a calendar.
Well,
now.
It's funny because I talked to my religion students about Luther pasting nailing the grievances to the wall, and basically that was the Facebook of the day. You nailed it to the wall and people read it.
Oh, what? Okay.
Yeah, it was the manual Facebook version.
That's where he got the idea.
Post it to the wall. Yeah, it could well be. That may well be what the idea is. Because if you look in communities where phones are not used, let's look at the Orthodox communities where phones are not nearly as prevalent as they are in the general population. They post things on the wall. They also have loudspeakers that drive through the community and announce things. And they'll announce things like funerals and weddings and all kinds of different events are posted. And
I remember in Los Angeles in the Armenian neighborhoods, just as you're saying that, it's like I remember those cars going through their neighborhoods.
Well,
yeah.
If you, back in the day when we get back to being able to do the ghost tours in Fort Pierce, part of the ghost tour is to talk about the town criers, right? The people who used to go from area to area within the town to distribute the news verbally. So, and there were things that were put on the walls and people would read them, and news traveled that way. And it was a little bit slower than, let me post this video of me doing a radio show that people can watch. Right? So, that's important.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? We've got, we forget that the world didn't always have instant everything. I know that Stuart talked briefly about the events of January 6th at the Capitol. We could see it. Right? People were posting videos of themselves. Hello. Yeah.
Really bright.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I've seen that T-shirt before.
Yeah. How do you think they're identifying people? It's not only the cameras within the Capitol themselves, but it's also the videos that people have posted. And the capture of other people, right? So if you're standing next to Henry, and Henry takes a picture and posts it on Henry's wall, and you're there, you're in the picture. Hello.
Duh.
Yeah. So it is a different kind of world. We hear about things much more quickly, and it's. I know that I can't be the only one who's ever had a feeling of, what am I reading about on Facebook or on Twitter? What's happened in the world, and then you go and look at the news. And I'm sure we've all been there, and the different ways that we get news, and a lot of it's not from our neighbors anymore. It's now from the various media, social media.
Sure.
And it's a different world. Our kids are growing up in a very different world than the worlds that you and I grew up in, and certainly a different world than the generations before us. We can't even begin to imagine what is and what was and what will be, what their kids are going to grow up in. We won't even recognize it.
I just wonder how much damage this past year will have done to all of the younger students, if you will, today.
I think in some ways that it will have created a necessary shift for them to being able to learn through the computer and distance, and it will teach some discipline if they're going to succeed. And I think that most kids want to succeed. So they're going to learn some different skills than the spoon feeding that was popular 10, 15 years ago.
Well, you've got something there.
Yeah.
I mean, I know just myself, I couldn't do the computer learning.
Yeah.
Because I am not disciplined.
It does take a discipline.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. That's why I like the
classroom.
Contrast with, with the
I
professor.
hear you. And the old style was that hundreds of students would gather and listen to one bright teacher, one bright professor, and you got what you got, and if you got enough, you passed the exams, and if you didn't, you didn't, and you either repeated or dropped out and did something else.
I remember, speaking of eye-to-eye contact with a professor at Loyola University in Los Angeles at the time. I mean, there was only, 16, 18 people in a classroom, if you will. And I was invited by one of my buddies that I went to high school with to come on out to UCLA to his freshman English class. I said, well, which building is it in? He goes, Pauley Pavilion. And I said, excuse me, that's the basketball arena. He said, yeah, there's 1,800 students in that class. And I couldn't believe my eyes. And
Yeah.
they had a big screen there for the prof, and wow.
Yeah, yeah. They you can see them on YouTube. There are segments of different professors teaching, and some of them are in these huge theaters,
Oh, yeah.
right, where the
oh,
students
yeah.
are up in the balconies and
Yep.
all over. I want to say swinging from them, but they'd probably shoot me for that. Yeah,
But I'm sure that's happened too.
not, and I'm not making light of shootings in any kind of an academic setting in any way, shape, or form. Let me be really clear about that. It was just the image of some of the comedies that I've seen inside theaters. But when I look at those huge classes and I contrast that to, say, something at IRSC where, anywhere from 30 to 50 students 50 is getting big. And there just aren't that many really large classes at IRSC.
That's good.
I agree. It's one of the things that I always did with students in the days of face-to-face classes, which hopefully we'll be getting back to eventually. I know there are some hybrid classes. IRSC is, to the best of my knowledge, continuing with the hybrid, which is half online, half in class, and the other distance mode, which is using Blackboard, Collaborate, or some other software to have a classroom with the students online. I've enjoyed that, and then there's pure what's called classic online or virtual campus, and it's now a global campus. And but in the face-to-face classes, I have had name cards. I have the students make out name cards so that I can get used to looking at the faces and the names, because as you know, I'm not always good with that for whatever reason. But doing a lot of things through the internet, that's an important source of information and connection for people. It just is. And to not be able to use that, we've gotten better at it. And it allows us to include more talent on a problem because people can join us remotely.
Yep.
And I think that's important. So we're actually going to, I think, move ahead more quickly with solving problems because we use some online and virtual things. But let me flip away from that and go back to Passover, because we've only got one more week and a day. And there's a lot to talk about with Pesach. Pesach is coming up, and it will be here Saturday night, the 27th. Right? Because, this is the 19th. Next Friday is the 26th. It's Saturday night, that night. And all Jewish holidays start in the evening, because Torah said, Vahi Erev, Vahi Voker, Yom Echad. It was evening, it was morning, a day. And so Jews say, yep, that's what God said. A day starts in the evening at sunset and goes to the next sunset. And that, to me, it's something everybody can see. Midnight, you can't see. It's an arbitrary setting on the world clock in Boulder. And, that's only been there since Boulder's been there. Yeah, it didn't happen before there was a Colorado. You kind of need to have Boulder, Colorado, and that's not something that started. I know some people there probably think it's been there since start, but not as a city. Anyway, so back to Pesach, to Passover. A couple of things about Pesach. Pesach is an interesting confluence of holidays. And what do I mean by that? When you look at a Jewish holiday, it will have a shepherd aspect to it. It will have a farmer aspect to it. And then it will have a religious or political aspect to it. And for Passover, that's indeed the case, Pesach. Pesach refers to the lamb that is eaten as part of the holiday. And there are some really important symbols for Pesach. The lamb, not so much, because we don't have a temple anymore. And the rabbis decided somewhere along the line that since we don't have a temple, we no longer do the lamb sacrifice. It's not true for Samaritans, and it's not true for some other smaller, similar practices. And but it's no longer, we don't have a temple, so we don't actually eat the lamb of the Passover. And that's okay. But we're also not as many shepherds anymore. And why was Pesach, why is the lambing an important part of it? So I said there's 3 aspects to it. So let's look at the lambing first. If you're a shepherd and you have a bunch of baby sheep, hey, that's really great. Your flocks have increased. You're in good shape. You can grow a lot of wool. And, things are going to be good. And let's say that God has graced you.
Sell the wood.
Wool, sell, yeah. And you can sell some of the meat. And,
sure.
And so on. And if you've got goats, you can sell some of the milk and different things that people would sell and use. And goat's skin was used too. So if you've got 100 little girl sheep, let's say that God graced you with 100 little girl sheep, and you've got all those little girls running around and they're now a year old, that's at about the age where they can start to become their own mothers. They mature, and they're going to come into something called estrus. Right? They're going to go into rut, and that actually is much more significant for the other segment. Now, if you've got 100 girl sheep and the sexes are about 50-50 as they are with humans, you can Google that, folks, and look it up. The ratio is about the same. You've got about as many little boy sheep running around as you do little girl sheep. And what happens to a little boy who's about a year old? They start to have those wonderful little things called hormones. And when the girls come in to season, into heat, into estrus, the boys lose what little wisdom they had, and it drops down to one desire. I'm trying to stay clean here. So what happens if you've got
almost sounds human. Oh, yeah. Never mind.
What happens if... So let's get practical. And anybody here who's a farmer can answer this question for me. How many boy sheep do you need to service 100 little girls? To make 100 little girls pregnant, how many boy sheep do you need?
10.
At most. Yeah. Right? Now what are you going to do with the other 90? Because what are they going to do? What do sheep and rams and goats do when it's mating season? I'm sure some people have seen the commercials of Bach beer, right, where they're right.
Yeah, butting horns.
They butt horns.
Yeah.
They fight.
Yeah,
and it gets nasty. It gets bloody, and animals and humans get injured. Humans, if you try to break it up. Yeah. So having a whole bunch of stray extra boys floating around, they're not going to give you milk. They're not going to give you babies. All they're going to give you is headaches, injuries, having to deal with them to separate them. And so what do you think happens to most of those yearling boys?
Sacrifice.
Yeah. Culling the herd.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if you don't
it makes perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense. And if you don't have refrigeration and you don't have a trucking system, then who's going to eat all of those lambs? You're going to have a festival. You'll dry some of it out. You'll do whatever. But you'll mostly have a festival with it. You'll swap it to people who are doing other things, such as growing wheat, making clothing, whatever. You're going to swap lamb meat, and so the lamb meat gets shared. That's the Pesach. It's right before the girls go in season. It's all the little yearling boys who you don't need in your breeding program.
Wow.
Yeah, makes complete sense.
It actually does.
It makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the point of the lamb. So let's look now at the wheat, because it's also called it's Chag HaPesach, the yearling ram, and it's also called Chag HaMatzot, the new wheat, the flat bread.
Spring wheat.
Winter wheat. Harvested winter wheat.
Right, correct, yes.
You're putting your spring crop in the ground.
Right.
In fact, the way that we know that it is the beginning of Pesach is that the barley is starting to sprout. That's specifically stated. So you've harvested your winter wheat, and here's the piece. In order to put that fresh winter wheat into the storage bins, you need to clean out everything that's in there. Because if you have a little bit of old, moldy wheat and you put a pile of fresh wheat in, what's going to happen? That mold and bacteria is going to travel right away into the new one and spoil it.
Yep.
So spring cleaning was essential. And we've learned over time that wheat, particularly stored in the ground, if it gets wet, can grow some of the most toxic bacteria and mold that we have on the planet. In fact, there are some scholars who think that the death of the firstborn that's described in scriptures is a result of the crop failure in Egypt, because they had the locusts and the hail and all the other catastrophes. And so it even says of the locusts that whatever was not damaged by the hail was eaten by the locusts. So we know that they had a total crop failure. And if you have a crop failure, then you have to use your old wheat. And why the firstborn? Because the firstborn gets a double cut off the top, and that's going to be the most toxic layer, if you will.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So the firstborn gets a double cut off the top. So in essence, the firstborn got a double dose of poison, whereas everybody just got a little bit, everybody else. And so that might have been part of the explanation. Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me. So Chag HaMatzot, the matzah is unleavened bread, and we didn't have Fleischmann's or anybody else's yeast to throw in to make bread. What do you do in the old days to make bread? You mix the ingredients and you set them out overnight. And the natural yeast that's in the air says, aha, fresh bread. And it jumps in and it starts growing inside the culture. And the bread rises overnight or over time. And then you knead it and throw it in the oven. And you don't have that if you're rushing. If you've cleaned out everything and you throw the new wheat in, you don't have time to sit overnight if you're going to celebrate it. So you quickly make up a flatbread, probably something much more like a tortilla than the square matzah that we have now. In fact, there are groups in Israel that say it should be a soft pita kind of lavosh kind of bread, maybe baked a little bit so that it's a little bit stiff. And so that's the matzah. All right. And then, of course, because it's spring, you've got spring vegetables. And that's why the rabbis say that the original Passover meal was a little bit of lamb meat with fresh vegetables rolled up inside one of these tortillas. So that's the Chag HaMatzot. It's the wheat festival.
Jewish burrito.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. It, and the word pita, by the way, means bread. So when you go to the store to buy pita, you're buying bread.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
wow.
In Aramaic, it's bread, and it probably is in Arabic as well.
I remember Carol talking about a lot of the Pakistani and Indian, and they always had some form of a flat bread.
Because it's quick and fast.
with the meals.
Yeah, it's fast and quick to make, and the flour doesn't spoil as long as it doesn't get wet. So a lot of those traditions make all kinds of sense when you look at an economy that isn't based on going to Publix or Safeways or Albertsons or Kroger's or A&P or whatever supermarket you have. And I'm sorry, Bravo or Winn-Dixie. Let me do our local ones as well. It doesn't matter what supermarket you have. They didn't used to have them. Did they have little markets? Yeah. But for the most part, people just traded what they needed with each other and swapped things out. So that's the matzah, is that flat bread, the fresh flour bread. And that doesn't have time to sit and rise. You don't usually use leavened bread in the temple, by the way. Usually it is the flatter bread, the fresh, the unleavened bread. It specifies that. And it's called matzah. This is the word for it. And then the third name for
But again, it's not the commercial matzah that
it's not
we would find in the
it's
store.
not, matzah became this wonderful square, and I like the square matzah. I really do. Streitz was a factory making matzah. I've been inside their old factory in Manhattan, rather. It's amazing. They were functional in a high-rise apartment kind of complex, but they made it work. It's what the factories used to be. Factories used to be vertical, and now they're horizontal. We've learned that it's faster to take stuff going one way through a long building than it is to take it up and down flights of stairs. Unless you've got really tall things like you do with some tire building equipment goes high. But now it's still long. The new factories are all long and going down a corridor.
But keep in mind, like you say, that was in kind of a residential area. I mean, that's how stuff
Oh, I'm sure.
started.
I'm sure it started in somebody's kitchen and slowly
Sure,
it
exactly.
It
yeah,
morphed and grew.
Yeah.
And it makes complete sense when you look back at it. So they made it square so that it would fit in square boxes so that you could ship it without corners being damaged. Because if you buy the round matzah and get it shipped, you usually get crumbs. It doesn't usually hold up. It's much harder to ship things that don't. The square matzah sits. It's pretty well sized to the box. Not a lot of, unless the boxes are really thrown and dropped, you're not going to get a lot of damage to the matzah. And that's the reason for it. It's a shipping practicality. But in the old days, it probably was much more the round and probably much more flexible. Over time, it got baked more and more to make sure that it didn't continue to rise, just accidentally acquire some yeast and have some part of it not baked, and off it would go. So that's the Chag HaMatzot. It's the new wheat, the winter wheat, the harvested wheat, cleaned out. And spring cleaning is part of the festival, getting rid of everything that's been opened and you start fresh. Spring cleaning comes out of Pesach.
Not a bad idea.
No, not a bad idea. It's a good idea to clean out the house once in a while and get a fresh start. So the third part of the holiday, Zman Cherutenu, and that is the time of our freedom. Why? Because as a people we left Egypt and started wandering. So that's the third theme of Pesach, is what does it mean to be free? How do we escape slavery? How do we help others escape slavery? And what's that all about? So those are the three themes. The lamb, which was instructed to be eaten that night with nothing left over so that it didn't sit and rot and get stinky. And we don't do that part anymore, as I said. We talk about it, but we don't actually do it. Most American Jews will either have a brisket or a chicken or sometimes a Cornish hen or something like that. Some will eat fish, and of course a vegan will eat vegan things.
But hasn't the political aspect of that holiday pretty much taken center stage?
What is the political aspect of the holiday? What are you relating to?
The freedom
Freedom?
aspect. Yeah.
I think freedom and coming home are big parts of the theme, right? So if you go and if you Google, or not Google, but if you go on YouTube and ask to see Passover songs, Israeli Passover songs, you'll almost always see that the theme is coming together as a family and freedom. The ability to come home, to not be in exile, and Now, you might notice there's a couple of things I didn't much mention in my description. Can you think of anything that I didn't talk about that people might think is part of Passover or Pesach?
See, the freedom aspect to me was always described as the reason why there's a Passover.
It's the biggest thing, is coming out of Egypt and
Sure.
and not having to answer to Pharaoh. Right. That is the huge part. The crossing of the Reed Sea It's Yam Suf. It's not Yam Adom. The Red Sea would be Yam Adom, and in scriptures it's Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. And we in Florida have a pretty good idea what a reed sea is all about. We've got tons of them here.
So the seas didn't part for you?
The sea does part. The water goes out. Anybody been here at a hurricane?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
The water leaves the shore, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you can walk through the reed marshes on dry ground. And if you read the scriptures carefully, Moses isn't what splits the sea, it's the east wind. When the wind comes from the east, it might just be a hurricane or a typhoon or a cyclone.
And, of course, they didn't know what that was back then.
They just knew it as the wind.
Sure.
Yeah. So, the east wind blew all night and split the sea.
Wow.
Okay, and then at the end of it, the wind comes again and blows the sea back.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
The backside of the
hurricane.
hurricane.
Backside of the hurricane. And so here's the other realistic piece. You're not going to move 2 million people through a body of water, even with the water parted that quickly. Witness how long it takes to evacuate Florida in the event of a hurricane. So the numbers are somehow not understood. That doesn't surprise me.
Well, could that be sort of an exaggeration over history, maybe?
I think that it really has to do with the word aleph, which is the Hebrew word for 1,000. It also is the number 1, so 1 to 1,000. I have a sneaking suspicion that it probably more meant families or units or something other than 1,000, a much smaller number. But, again, CNN wasn't there, MSNBC wasn't there, Fox News wasn't there.
Oh, we had no film of this stuff?
We had no film of it, and nothing documented other than the story that comes down.
Yeah.
And so we really don't know what those words meant to the people who used them. Like I say to you, I've got 1,000 reasons. And you say to me, write them down. You might find that I don't quite have 1,000.
Yeah, right. Sure. So in Hebrew itself, it could mean
many things.
1 or 1,000.
Yeah. Well, it's the first letter of the alphabet. So, and that's gematria. That's the Hebrew numbering system. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, Gamatria, Gamma is 3. That's a different numbering system. That's probably, the Greeks probably used that. They didn't probably use Roman numerals until after Rome comes up. The Roman numeral system is to use combinations of letters to represent numbers so that it becomes obvious that it's a number by the format. And the Arabic numbering system...
Oh, God, yes.
Right?
Sure.
Was the idea of using symbols to represent numbers. Why? Because there is no letter for 0. And if you're going to have a 0 and negative numbers, which the Arab numbering system gives us. We didn't have negative numbers before that. You've never seen an algebraic equation done with Roman numerals, have you?
No.
People don't balance their checkbooks with the Roman numeral system, although that way you'd never have 0 in your account.
That's how I've always done it.
Yeah. Well, you should theoretically keep it that way, right? Always in the positive. And but the Arabic numbering system, they bring the concept of sunya, of 0, and bring that to Europe and the rest of the world as they come through all of the parts of the world. And you can hear the Arabic in the word algebra. When I say it that way, algebra. The maths, yeah. And so the higher maths, thank you, Arabic numbering system. Now, with that, let me also say that the numbers, the symbols that we use have changed, and they don't exactly match the Arab numbering system that's used in Arabic now. But the idea of having a symbol for the number, thank you to the Arabs. Why did they need that? Because they were traders. And when you do trade, you need to be able to number things.
Sure.
You need to be able to keep books so that you know if you're showing a profit. For a shepherd, it's very easy. You look out, are you using more grazing land than you used last year? You've got you've got an increase. And we talk about the shepherd and the sheep passing underneath the rod. That means to count the babies going through the gate. Yeah. So you know how many new ones you have. And every once in a while you count the herd and you see if your herd's increasing.
That's how Disney got the idea.
No comment.
No comment.
So that's the different aspects of the holiday. And in the days of the temple, so that would go until about 6370, somewhere in there, numbering being a little bit fuzzy in the very small numbers of the Gregorian calendar. The temple is destroyed by the Romans. Prior to that, then the sheep would have been brought in preparation for Pesach and slaughtered on the temple grounds, the blood drained, and then people roast the meat. It's an interesting piece. That meat is specified to be roasted. So it's a different way of making. It's not the boiling that is much easier. Roasting is a more hands-on kind of way of cooking and preparing food.
But again, you say that, there's no blood, and that makes perfect sense back in that time.
Oh yeah, you definitely want to drain all the blood.
Oh yeah,
out because of bloodborne pathogens. Right, so they're going to make a point of draining all of the blood out of the animals, and that blood goes into the ground. There's a whole big ritual obviously associated with that, but the idea is to return the blood to the ground and get it away from where it's going to make people sick and stink, very candidly.
Those folks were so advanced in their own way.
They were in their own ways. They weren't technologically advanced, but they were certainly pretty wise with what they had.
Oh yeah.
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 And we look back at it, and the protocols are pretty amazing.
Well, and as you have mentioned in the past, just understanding the aspects of the pluses and minuses of what this blood could do to the human body is sure.
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons sometimes people will say something about blood. Jews in general have a very off-putting attitude. Don't want to see blood, don't want it on the plate, don't want the meat bloody, no parts of blood.
No rare steaks for you.
Yeah, you won't find rare meat in a kosher restaurant.
That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why. It's because of the injunction to not use blood in any way or eat blood which of course makes liver challenging, but that's why the big heavy salting of food is to draw out the blood, any last vestiges of it, because the injunction is to not eat it. And it made a lot of sense. So yeah, but that, as I said, that part stopped about a little over 1900 years ago, about 1950 something. And so yeah, at that point the Seder had to change. The meal, Seder simply means order. So if you go into, or arrangement, if you go into a flower shop, you buy a Seder. You buy an arrangement of flowers. It's called a Seder. Same word as the ordered meal, the ritual meal. So before the temple is destroyed, the meal would have included a little bit of that lamb, the matzah, and some fresh spring vegetables, what's available. And if you look around, look at all the trees. You could easily grab little bits and pieces of fresh growth.
You bet. Oh yeah.
It's everything's coming up. My friend Jabani's got some flowers on it already. So everything is starting to grow. It's an easy time to do a festival because food is abundant. And so that's the pieces of it. And once the temple's destroyed, the lamb doesn't continue, but the matzah and the spring vegetables do. And the rabbis looked around. They looked around at what was going on just about 2,000 years ago, a little less. And they looked at the Persian festival of Nowruz, the spring celebration. Yeah, spring festivals are important. And they looked at the Roman symposium, because they were everywhere, because the Romans were. And they basically blended those two to create what we know as today's Seder. In fact, if you look for a Haftzin or Hafshin plate out of the Zoroastrian tradition, the spring festival plate, you will find that it looks amazingly like a Seder plate.
There you go, back again to the Zoroastrians.
You know, stuff went up and down the Silk Roads, folks.
Wow.
It just did.
Yeah, that's
It's
incredible.
where citruses came from, is China and Asia. Hello. Yeah. And why eggs? Why eggs? There's nothing in the Passover tradition about eggs. But eggs show up everywhere. Why? Because the chickens are laying again. The geese start laying again. So eggs are abundant and a sign of spring as well. They're also a sign of fertility. A lot of spring festivals include a fertility aspect, which is why Christians include a rabbit and eggs, because that's an old organic spring fertility festival that gets folded in and incorporated, just as the eggs get incorporated into Pesach. They're really not part of the story. People didn't worry so much about chickens, but
Well, that's not a Christian thing with
the
like.
eggs and bunnies. It's not a Christian thing in Passover.
Wasn't that a pagan thing?
That was kind of what I was
Europe?
trying to say. Organic, yes.
Okay.
Meaning, well, all right. So pagan, that's a word that I think we tend to very much misunderstand.
Okay.
Pagan is really more a naturalist, organic kind of religion. It's an indigenous kind of celebration of the earth and the cycles. And we do have big parts of it. We have something called Samhain, which you would know as Halloween, Halloween,
Oh, brother.
where you light lanterns for your ancestors to help them on their way in
Oh.
gourds.
Okay.
And then you have a spring festival called Ostara.
Wow.
Which might or might
man.
not have anything to do with the spring festival of Purim with Esther. But, you know,
Oh, my.
yeah, we're much more interconnected than we think,
Yeah.
right?
I'd
And,
say
and
so.
in the winter, you have the season of Yule. Those all come out of, right? And the word Wicca means wise one. A witch is a wise one.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
That'll
things
open up a
things
can
get
of worms.
valenced. Things get valenced over time, in ways that are almost frightening. In this desire to decide who's in and who's out, who's us and who's them. You know, Stewart on Ask a Lawyer talked about parties. People have always divided into factions and into groups, and there's always the in and the out, us and them. And in ancient days, going all the way back again, being connected to a group was part of survival. Because if you were alone, you were much more likely to have catastrophes and disasters and no safety net. Nobody to help you. But if you were part of a community, then you had people to come around you and help when you needed it. And we're reminded, and it's particularly this time of year, we're reminded to never to never forget to blot out the memory of. Okay, hear the contradiction in there. Don't forget
Is that a triple
to
negative?
blot out. Yeah. Remember to blot out the memory of Amalek. Why? Because Amalek attacked the stragglers, the outsiders, the fringe. And a lot of people say, well, you know, the problem is Amalek. No, the problem is the community that allows stragglers to be isolated. And the way that you blot out the memory is by not having stragglers.
Ooh.
Yeah. Kind of throws the onus back onto the community.
Yeah.
where I think it rightfully belongs. We need to take care of each other. We need to be really social creatures, the way we're designed to be, to take care of one another, to make sure that nobody lacks. That's my personal dream. A world where nobody lacks food, nobody lacks basic clothing, a place to sleep, basic shelter, and just and basic medical care. I'm not talking about the $1 million exotic stuff. I'm talking about basic medical care for day-to-day living.
Is that ever going to happen?
God, I hope so.
As screwed up as we are.
Yetz Hashem, if with God's help. Right? When we get it that it's one God who creates one universe, and that we all live on this third rock until we figure out how to live somewhere else. But right now we're all here, and you can't do something here that isn't felt around the world. We can't drill a hole in the bottom of our seat on the ship and not affect our neighbors.
Right.
And until we understand that, then we're gonna continue to pull ourselves down. If you think that not wearing a mask is okay because you have a right to drill a hole under your seat on the boat, you don't. And it's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
It really is that simple. We do have a responsibility to each other because we are on the same boat. We're on the same planet.
Well, and I think this pandemic has shown us that.
Yeah.
This is all the same boat, no matter where you are in the world.
Animals go up and down all over the place, and we're animals too. Humans migrate and travel, mingle. We've mingled since there were people. Because trading, no one person can do it all.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to raise the sheep. Somebody needs to raise the wheat. And they don't get along together well because the sheep eat the wheat. And there's always been a fight between shepherds and farmers for that reason.
That's really interesting. Yeah, you sure?
Yeah, some of these things have not really changed. They've changed expression, they've changed technology, but they haven't changed the bottom dynamic. People are people.
Yeah.
And the ancients were far from stupid. They were very bright. We just don't have good records of it.
I'm just amazed when you start comparing various festival type things that go back thousands of years, and you just think, wow.
Pesach is much more than 2,000 years old. 3,000, 4,000, some, I don't know.
Sure.
I have no idea how old it is. I don't trust calendar counting very far back. Just because calendars were created after the fact and counted back. It's true of the Gregorian calendar, and it's got errors in it. And it tried to fix the errors in the Julian calendar. That had errors in it, too. I have no doubts that other calendars have errors as well.
Do you have an idea geographically when the folks fled Egypt, where they wound up?
Well, they wander somewhat. Yeah, they eventually get to Israel, crossing the Jordan Creek, and it is a creek in parts, creek, depending on where you're from. The Jordan is not mighty and wide in most of its places. It's kind of meandering and small.
I didn't know that. Okay, never been there.
Yeah.
Wow.
It is not the wide Missouri.
Okay.
It is not the Nile. It is not the Amazon. Those are big rivers. The Jordan is a little tiny river. It just comes down out of the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret.
Wow.
And which, by the way, in Christian scriptures gets renamed the Lake of Tiberias. But that's a whole nother history lesson that we don't have time for with only 4 minutes left. So, that was called a sea, too. It's, not that big. You can see across it. Can't see across the Mediterranean, but you can see across
Wait a minute. You can't see across Lake Okeechobee.
Yeah. Which gives you some scale.
Whoa. Okay.
Israel's not a very big country.
No, it's not.
It's a postage stamp size of a country. I'd have to look it up, but it's not a whole lot of miles. It'd be interesting to see how big it is compared to Florida. I wouldn't be surprised if we're bigger. I don't remember my geography well enough. But Israel's not. We used to drive from end to end of it when I lived there as a student. We would crisscross the country, and it didn't take days. Now, we weren't going on a donkey either, but buses and cars. So, yeah. So you have to realize some of the scale of what's going on. What's the technology? It's not fair to look back and judge people 2,000 or 3,000 years ago based on the technology that we have now. David is the one who helps bring the Iron Age into Judea from the Philistines who had it. The Philistines are the first ones to have iron. The books of Kings tells us about the iron coming in because they go to the Philistines for tools, and that's a clue.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you really read carefully, you can learn many things.
There you go, back to the trading.
Back to that, yeah. Trading. Yeah. And, and unfortunately, you also have people taking advantage of others when somebody gets the upper hand in technology. That hasn't changed either. We still have that. We're not sharing our technology as well as we should either. And technology is what's going to help us do those things that I talked about feeding everybody, clothing everybody, minimum care. And that's not to say, I'm not saying get rid of a capitalist kind of incentive. I'm just saying let's set the basement at a place where people can live and not let people fall below that. So that's, that kind of a system. So with that, we've got one more week to go. If you'd like to join us for our Seder, please check out the website, www.eitzchaym.org. We are going to be doing a virtual Seder, so you can join us for that and get a great catered meal. You can order that from 2J's on our website as well, or Facebook. Check us out. Congregation Eitz Chaim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb, and this is, as they say, a wrap of Ask a Rabbi.
So for all of you listening in the old Pueblo, this is the new Pueblo signing off.
There you go. And we do have some folks from Tucson on.
I know. You always do. Have a good week.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for being here.
This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie.